Thank you for saying so. Well, good evening, everyone. Are we live or do we need a minute to go live? That may be a Melissa question.
It wouldn't unmute. Sorry about that. You're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is Katie Crystal speaking, the chair of NVTC. Welcome to our meeting of March 4th, 2021. We are beginning the meeting at 7:02 p.m. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we'll be meeting electronically. And let it be noted that our faithful commission staff followed all of the procedures and guidelines in the legislation that enables us to meet electronically to give adequate notice to not only commissioners, but also to the staff and public. The latter two categories of whom we hope are following along with us on YouTube, where this meeting is being simultaneously broadcast to the public. Just a couple of reminders, although as we go on year 2 of virtual meetings, I'm sure these are second nature to everyone. Please do mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That helps us manage the background noise. And as always, we have that chat feature available, especially if you're having technical difficulties, but very important that we not discuss any public business in that chat function. And of course, it always helps if you can identify yourself if you are either making or seconding a motion, so that our secretary can catch that for the minutes. So Ms. Gilchrist, I'm going to turn it over to you to call the roll for the purposes of quorum and staff who are participating tonight as well.
Thank you. Please respond with here or present when you hear your name called. Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Gary.
Present.
Mr. Alcorn.
Here.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker. Mr. Dave Ferranti.
Here.
Mr. Eben.
Here.
Ms. Filler-Corn.
Here.
Mr. Faust.
Here.
Ms. Garvey.
Present.
Mr. Krizik.
Here.
Mr. Letourneau. Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Ms. Pelchik.
Present.
Mr. Reed.
Present.
Mr. Smedberg.
Present.
Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Turner. Mr. Walkinshaw. Ms. Mitchell. Here. Mr. Stork.
Here.
Was that Mr. Stork?
Yes, here.
Thank you. We do have quorum. The following staff are participating in the meeting: Executive Director Kate Mattheist, Director of Finance and Administration Scott Kalkorth, Director of Programs and Policy Alan Fye, NVTC Commission Secretary Rhonda Gilchrist, Web and IT Manager Melissa Walker, WMATA Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Commuter Choice Senior Program Manager Ben Owen, Program Analyst Zachary Smith, NVTC Legislative Liaison Amy Perrin-Seibert, NVTC Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac, VRE Chief Executive Officer Rich Dalton, VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield, WMATA General Manager and CEO Paul Wiedefeld, WMATA's Vice President of Government Relations Regina Sullivan, WMATA's Virginia Government Relations Officer Greg Potts, Virginia Department of Transportation Division Administrator for Tolling Operations David Caudill, Virginia Department of Transportation 66 Express Lanes Facility Manager John Mason. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thanks so much, Ms. Gilchrist. So everyone should hopefully have a copy of the agenda as well as the meeting materials to preview it briefly. We have actually just a few action items this month. The consent agenda, which includes our always present electronic meeting resolution, and then also a resolution that approves our delay in the budget adoption process. This is per our conversation last month to propose moving adoption forward a little bit longer until after the jurisdictions have adopted our budgets. And then we'll also have a vote on comments to WMATA on the fiscal 22 budget. We also have some pretty important non-action items to cover. Most important of which is that we are welcoming the WMATA General Manager and CEO Paul Wiedefield to discuss metro-related issues, and surely the budget will be chief among them, but many other issues I know are always on commissioners' minds. So, Mr. Wiedefield, welcome. We're glad to have you and looking forward to that conversation. We will also have reports from Mr. Smedberg as the Virginia WMATA board member. Unfortunately, Mr. Letourneau is in a budget meeting back in his home jurisdiction tonight. So, Paul, you're flying solo, but I know you'll do a great job. I will welcome to the CEO of the Virginia Railway Express, as always, and the DRPT director to give us some updates. Also an important non-action item, as noted by Ms. Gilchrist, we have Dave Caudill from VDOT tonight to give us some updates on toll revenues and projections on 66 inside the Beltway. I know commissioners, especially ones who happen to drive on 66, have noticed big changes to the level of vehicles on those toll lanes over the last year. And so we really appreciate, Mr. Caudill, you're joining us to give us a little bit of an update on the status of those toll revenues and projections. We'll receive too an update on state legislative action and agenda. Welcome to the members of our General Assembly. We hope you've had a chance to catch your breath for 1 minute. So we'll look forward to a recap of the session, an update on federal legislative action, which is also fast moving, and then finally an update on the commuter choice program. So lots to cover, although our action items, like I said, are relatively few. I'm going to move straight into the consent agenda. Again, the resolution to find the need to meet electronically and proposal or proposed resolution to authorize the delay in the adoption of our budget until after the localities have adopted theirs. Before I ask for a motion, Kate, did we receive any comments from the public on these items or others tonight?
No, Madam Chair, we did not receive any public comments.
Okay, well, let me invite a motion, or if there is any concern or desire to discuss these items separately, now would be an opportune time to do that as well.
Madam Chair, McKay moves approval.
Second.
Thank you very much. Moved by Chairman McKay. Mr. Berg.
Correct.
Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I'm going to turn it back to Ms. Gilchrist for a roll call vote.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Gary,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell, Ms. Bennett Parker, Mr. De Ferrenti,
Aye.
Mr. Eben,
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Korn,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau, Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Palchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Turner, Mr. Walkinshaw. With Mr. Walkinshaw not here, I do believe he's going to be joining us later, but Mr. Stork, you could vote as his alternate if you'd like.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Gilchrist. And I apologize, I promised everyone just a couple of action items, but we do have a third, which is that we need to approve our minutes. So if I could entertain a motion to do that, that would be the minutes of our February 4th meeting, which were in your meeting packet.
So moved.
Great,
Second.
that's our vice chairman. Do we have a second?
Second, this is Elliot Reed.
Great, thank you so much. Unless there is any further discussion on the minutes, I will turn it back to our secretary for another roll call vote.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Gary,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell, Ms. Bennett Parker, Mr. DeFerrenti,
Aye.
Mr. Eben,
Abstain.
Ms. Filler-Korn, Ms. Filler-Korn? Thank you. Mr. Faust?
Aye.
Ms. Garvey?
Aye.
Mr. Krizik? Mr. McKay?
Aye.
Mr. Meyer?
Aye.
Ms. Palchik?
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Turner, he's not here, Mr. Walkinshaw, and Mr. Stark as Mr. Walkinshaw's alternate.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome the General Manager and CEO of WMATA, Paul Wiedefield. Mr. Wiedefield, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really glad to have you here to bring us up to speed on some of the challenges facing WMATA, to help give some texture to the budget deliberations and proposal that I know is now on the table for fiscal year 22, certainly as the principal funding partners, but also as jurisdictions whose future of land use, quality of life, and economic development is intrinsically linked to Metro's future. We are just very glad to have you to take the time to speak with us and cover some wide-ranging topics, I hope, in both your presentation and discussion. So I understand we've got some slides of yours. We will tee those up, and colleagues, if we could just hold questions till the end of Mr. Wiedefield's presentation, at which time we'll open the floor. So, Mr. Wiedefield, over to you, and thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can, a little muffled, but that may be the volume on my end. I think we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay, I'll go. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I did want to thank the recently passed budget bill that filled an issue we had on dedicated funding. So thanks for everyone for that support. Obviously, thanks everyone for the jurisdictional support for the operating budget. That continues to come into the agency. And I also want to thank, obviously, Chairman Smedberg and Matt Letourneau, just fantastic representatives of Northern Virginia and the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. They do a fantastic job making sure that we're on our toes all the time, which is part of their job, and making sure that they're representing all of you. So I think I just wanted to thank them. So what I'd like to do, if I could, is just give you an overview of the operating budget, the capital program, a safety update, and a legislative outlook. If I could just stay here for a second on the overview, just to give you a sort of a 30,000 foot level. As you can imagine, the 22 budget is very similar to the 21 budget post-COVID. Extremely challenging for all of us, and something that was constantly moving under our feet as we developed it in 21 and 22. It started off the same way, to be frank. We continue to face major challenges on ridership. Our ridership system-wide is down about 75% to pre-COVID levels. Rail ridership remains down almost 90%. Bus is in the 60% down. So as you can imagine, that's had a tremendous impact on our revenues. Our expenses are up a little bit because of COVID, as we do a number of things, obviously keep our employees and customers safe. Thankfully, with the relief bill that passed in December, we were able to solve issues in the 21 budget, and we're able to solve a good portion of the 22 budget, which I'll get into shortly. Whereas, as you can imagine, we're watching very closely what's happening on Capitol Hill right now as we speak, both on the House side and the Senate side right now, and hopefully we'll get additional support there. So I think the big message here in the operating budget is I think we all have to remain flexible. We can anticipate change. The strategy that we've taken with the support of the board is that we don't we basically make sure we know what we know, and we go from that. If things work out better, that's great, but we cannot. It's much easier to bring things back in than to cut further. So that's sort of the overall approach that we've taken. On the capital program, thanks to the dedicated funds and also the PREA funds, we continue to make tremendous strides in both safety, service reliability, and state of good repair needs. And we will continue to do that. In terms of safety, our primary focus, as you can imagine now, has been on the safety of our customers and our employees with COVID. And I'll be talking more about that. And in terms of the legislative outlook, again, there's been a lot of activity on the PREA recently, so that's fantastic. And as you know, we're again monitoring what's happening on the Hill, and I'll get a little bit further into that. And as we look at the future, I think we all recognize, both locally, nationally, and truly internationally, that there will be a new normal. And we all need to step back and think about what that is and how do we position ourselves for that. So I did want to wrap up, just talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, if that's okay. Okay. So with that, I'll turn now to the operating budget and get into just a few of the numbers. I know I'm certain you've seen some of this already, but the current budget, as you can see, our revenues are basically at roughly 240 million. To put that in perspective, the budget pre-COVID for 21, we anticipated $823 million in revenue. So a significant drop in revenues of almost 70%. Our expenses do go up a bit in 22. I'll explain what those expenses are in a minute, but by and large, it's been fairly stable to the 21 budget. What that leads us with is the subsidy level, which again is we're keeping that pretty much at the same level was it last year. There are a few increases in that, and I'll explain that in a minute with the next slide. But it leaves us with a funding gap of roughly $725 million. Thankfully, the relief back in December provided us almost $515 million, which leaves us an overall budget gap for the 22 budget of roughly $210 million. So with that, the recommendation for the 22 budget that we're taking out to the public now for comment is as follows. At the next slide. So the thinking here is to provide as much of the 21 service levels, which we were able to increase a bit with the COVID money that we got and with this money in December, to support the regional economy, but also position us as we start to pull out of the pandemic, that we were prepared to meet the ridership. So that's the general philosophy. We understand the pressures that the local governments are under. So we're foregoing the 3% increase in the subsidy, although there is a net increase of $42 million, and that's with things that are above the 3%. So in effect, that's the Silver Line Phase 2, additional funds for the Metropolitan Safety Commission, work we have to do there, and to bring Cinderbed back inside. But otherwise, the subsidy level that you paid last year remains the same. We are assuming the Silver Line Phase 2 revenue service begins in July 21. That's one that we're all looking at very closely, as you can imagine. But right now, that is still where the airport stands, that they would be a substantial completion in the near future, and which then would drive us towards the July 21 startup date. We will be seeking, given the roughly $210 million hole that we do have, we will be working with our unions on the collective bargaining agreements and ask them, in effect, to freeze where they are. And for those that are not represented by unions, in effect, to defer any increases in 22 to start to chip away at that $210 million hole. One of the things that we are not suggesting or recommending is that, in effect, we take from the capital program to fund the operating side. As for you, anyone that's been around here for a while knows that's been a fact. That's how we created some of the issues that we've been digging out of for the last decade or so. So we did not want to go there. So we're suggesting not to do that again this year. We do include roughly about $20 million in a Silver Line Phase 2 equity adjustments. Just a little bit of background. Anytime you add new service to a transit system, you need to do an equity analysis. How does it impact low income and people of minority communities? We've done some preliminary work there, and there is what we see is a bit of a disparity there. And so we're suggesting, that we put aside some dollars to deal with that. We won't finalize that number until basically we know the exact date of the startup date, because one of the things we need to do is do that final analysis as we get closer to the startup date. But we just wanted to make sure that as we started to plan for the 22 budget, that we identified some source of funds for there to deal with that issue. So that, as you can imagine, that requires additional cuts then after we do the things that we're going to do from a management side and asking our employees not to take any raises and things of that sort. It still leaves a hole roughly about $170 million. So with the next slide, I'll show you how that plays out. So if you look on the left-hand side of this slide is sort of where we are today and where we'll be in basically the first 6 months of, in fact, through December of 21. So on the rail side, basically, we'll be running roughly about 80% of pre-COVID service, running 7 days a week, closing at 11 p.m., 12-minute headways on weekdays, 15 minutes on weekends, and then on the bus side, remaining roughly about 85% of pre-COVID levels. So again, the plan is to do that as far as we can, again, with the hope that the vaccine kicks in, people start to come back, and we get additional dollars, right? If we don't, this is what, unfortunately, what it starts to look like in Q3 and Q4. We'd have to pull back the rail service to roughly 30% of pre-COVID levels. We'd have to pull back bus service roughly to 50% pre-COVID levels. And you can see some of the details of what that would mean. The bottom line here, if you see on the FTEs, full-time equivalent employees, would require roughly elimination of 2,500 full-time employee equivalents, either layoffs or other things that we'd have to do. So that's the, obviously where none of us want to be. But again, the thinking is, as we developed this budget really in the fall, we started developing this in the fall, we had to make certain assumptions. And the philosophy has been, we'd rather make assumptions that we can pull back from than assumptions that we can't, and then have to go back out and tell people we can't deliver what we said we could deliver. So this is what we could deliver if everything falls, unfortunately, this way. We're all hoping that it doesn't. We're all working to make sure it doesn't happen that way. But it is our duty to have a balanced budget, and this is what is required to do that. Next slide, please. As you can imagine, with the pandemic, like we're doing here tonight, and particularly with this budget, we wanted to do everything we could to get as much public input as we could. We've done a number of things differently this year, reaching out to all types of different sources, obviously electronically, but tremendous surveying information that we're getting from our customers. And we're working with the business community in different areas, basically to get the word out and what's going on. We literally physically are out in the system at our rail stations, at major bus stops, sharing information about the budget, where you can comment on it and share your thoughts on it. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand we're just not doing a public hearing and then just that's it. There's a lot more that had to go into it this year, which I think makes a lot of sense for all of us. Some of the key milestones. What drives our budget is to line up for the federal dollars. We need to get certain things into the federal government in the April timeframe. So that sort of drives the entire schedule, to be frank. So this is what you see. That's what we're doing here. Is we're out in the public right now. In effect, we will take it to the board in April, seeking approval, and then submit all the things we can to get as many federal dollars as we can. So that's what drives a lot of our process. And the budget year begins July 1. If I could now just turn to the capital program at a high level. So the capital program, really, as you think about it, what we try to do is address both the overdue capital needs that basically we still need to sort of dig a hole out of. And then we have ongoing things. We have almost a 50-year-old system, and we need to constantly keep on top of that so we don't slip backwards. So on the overdue issues, we've achieved a lot over the last few years, thanks again to the dedicated funding, and the PREA funding has allowed us to do that. We've basically got all the 7,000 series cars in. We've done a lot on the track rehab and safety, as you've all experienced. We've completed the platform works all in Virginia, so we've gotten that behind us. For instance, we still have more things to do. Just on the right-hand side, lots of structural issues that we have throughout the system. Bridges, tunnels, water mitigation, things of that sort. A number of things on the system side, and then just basic facilities. Some of our bus facilities are over 100 years old, for instance. So those things will continue to need to be done. And then we need to just do the basic cyclical things that you would do in a major capital investment entity like we have here at Metro. Just want to give a few examples of what has been accomplished in Virginia. The next slide, please. The platform work, I mean, this is one that, the reason I picked this one, obviously, this is one that has impacted our customers the most, is something very visible that people understand versus some system or, working inside of a tunnel. But basically, as you know, as you had experienced, we have some of our platforms are now approaching 40 years old. They literally were crumbling under our feet. So basically, we have completed almost 50% of the program. 11 of the Virginia stations are completed. We have one that's underway now in Arlington Cemetery. We'll be done that in May. We just started in February 13th. We have the shuttle buses and all that in place like we've done at other things. But this has been one that when we open these things back up, the customer notices, they appreciate it, and they see the value of what we're doing, and they understand the short-term pain to get these longer-term gains. So it's really been a good project for us. We have a number of projects now in Maryland for the next 2 years that we will be doing basically we're out of Virginia after we get out of the Arlington Cemetery Station. One other area is the escalators. Again, another one that impacts our customers that they see and feel quite a bit. We just recently awarded a contract to basically replace 130 of the escalators throughout the entire system over the next few years. If you're not aware, I believe we have the most escalators in the Western Hemisphere. Our agency does. It is, it's one of the tremendous values that Metro has compared to other transit systems, is our elevator and escalator system. But it is something that has to be maintained and replaced over time. So that is a very big customer service initiative that we have underway. And again, anyone that knows 10 to 12 years ago, we had a totally different situation with our escalator performance. We now perform in the upper 90s in terms of reliability on that system. Another one that is we did in Virginia was the Alexandria Rail Yard. We had that yard closed. Again, these are things that are safety and reliability driven that, again, at the end of the day, provide a much better product for our customers. Let me move now to a safety update, and particularly on the COVID cases. On the left-hand side of this slide gives you a sense of the impact it's had on our workforce. We have roughly over 12,000 employees. We've had over almost 5,000 now since, in fact, in where we're at now in March, almost 5,000 COVID-related cases. So that may be people that either had COVID or had quarantined for COVID or some issue related to that. So it is a very large portion of our workforce. And tragically, we've lost 4 employees due to COVID. So it is a, just tremendous focus of ours to basically do everything we can for our employees here. We've actually had over 1,000 confirmed cases. Most of those people have come back to work, are hospitalized now, and we'll continue, obviously, to do everything we can there. On the right-hand side is just an example of some of the things we're doing. One of the things that we started was a mobile testing of our employees. And so they obviously can get testing anywhere, in the public, but we wanted to bring it to them, to their work site. Obviously, we care about them, but we also wanted to knock down some fear and things of that sort. And we've been very pleased that basically our rate has been lower than generally the region in terms of the positivity rate. So that is a good sign. I think it's a lot of the communication that we've been doing, a lot of the training we've been doing, a lot of the outreach we've been doing with our employees, and obviously their own personal initiatives to making sure they're keeping themselves safe. So that's a very good sign. We do this roughly every 2 weeks, and we'll continue to do that. On the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing for the public, and again, a little bit more in the workforce. But basically, we did recently, this is one that's cutting edge. We've gotten a federal grant to basically look at the air filtration systems that we use both on bus and rail. So that's very exciting. And the industry is looking for information from that. And obviously we are. We do proactive and responsive cleaning protocols. So obviously we're constantly cleaning. But if we have any report of any incident of an incident with someone that had COVID or is tested positive for COVID at one of our stations or one of our facilities, we go in and clean that very thoroughly. So you may see there may be a station closed periodically for a few hours. That's what's going on there. If you see that play out. Facial coverings and hand sanitizers we have throughout the entire. We have now put masks on dispensers on all of our buses, over 1,500 buses we have. Again, so that everyone has the opportunity, if they forgot their mask, to wear one, and we offer them to them. We've created a touchless fare collection system. We're in the middle of that. We've gotten the Apple iPhone, basically where you never need to touch either a vending machine or the turnstile to go through. You just use your phone. You get a proximity and it goes. We also worked with the Greater Washington Partnership to create a real-time crowding information so people can literally look at a station and see what it looks like in terms of numbers, in terms of people. In terms of workforce, I mentioned the mobile testing. We're coordinating with all of the local health departments and state health departments on trying to get as many of our employees vaccinated as we can. They are all in a certain category now to be vaccinated. We have safety kits that we give to all of our employees. We've created office reentry for those that aren't in bus division or a rail station, but are behind the office or the back offices, to have guidelines of how we're going to bring people back as they start to come back. And then a visitor screening portal for anyone that basically comes into any of our facilities, that we screen them before they come in. So again, I just wanted to hit on this because it's so important for our employees and for our customers. So in terms of the legislative update and some of the future challenges, on the legislative side, the emergency COVID funding, that is one that we are very excited about, and the 30.5 billion that is currently in the bill. Obviously, we hope that that stays. That works out to about 1.4 billion for the DC region. Again, some of that comes to us. It gets spread out through all the region, but that would be just fantastic for us. Obviously, it would help us. It would deal with the 22 budget issue if that comes through. So we're all pushing and pulling for that to occur. In terms of PREA, thanks to our congressional delegation, Congressman Conley, particularly, and Senator Warner, basically have both put in the legislation to continue that for the next 10 years. So that is fantastic. And it will, again, allow us to continue to chip away at these big issues that we've been working on. It does have some additional funds for the Office of Inspector General, which is great too. I mean, they keep everyone on their toes, and that's their job. And I think that's fantastic for us as well. In terms of looking forward, and again, this is something that is both, a national and international challenge, but as we all try to sort of work through what does that future travel pattern start to look like, with people either commuting differently, different times, it's all an unknown right now, right? And we're all working through that. The biggest thing, though, obviously, is as people get vaccinated, what we see when they start to come back. In everything that we've done in terms of surveying, generally people will come back. They may come back, though, at different times of the day. They may, just the work habits are changing. But we can do so much more than just work, and we do so much more than just move people at work. And as people start to adjust what they do in terms of their free time, again, we can play a central role to that. The key going forward is to work with all the jurisdictions to understand this and then create an approach to deal with it. And particularly, it's important for the local bus operators, so that we work in conjunction with them in developing their system to support ours and ours to support their efforts, particularly with bus rapid transit. I know that's a very big initiative in Northern Virginia. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything to think through what the future looks like with others, business community, obviously, tourism community, educational institutions, to think of what that new future looks like and how do we adjust to it. It is something that the board is very focused on, and we're starting to obviously work on. As we're moving through the 22 budget, it will be much, much more of a greater focus for us as the pandemic hopefully all gets under control. And I think with that, I'd be glad to take any questions or comments that you might have.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the extensive presentation, more insights into some of the current thinking of the management team. And I know that you are joined by both Regina and Greg tonight, right? So you've got some help in handling any questions that commissioners may have. Colleagues, I think that we may be a moderately sized enough group that I can sort of see physical hands without having to use the raise hands function. So I am going to just keep a lookout for anybody who might like to start us off. I see Ms. Palchik, followed by Mr. McKay.
Sure. Oh, thank you. I'm happy to let our chairman go first. Thank you. And thank you so much, Paul, for your presentation, and for your team today who also joined us at the Titans Partnership Silverline meeting. That was really helpful. We appreciate their work. I want to commend you on the Spanish outreach and engaging our diverse communities. I'd love to see how that goes, and if you all learn more about how to continue to improve that. But I very much appreciate that, and that you've added masks to be more available. So thank you on that. My question, and in Providence District, I've got six stops here on the silver and the orange lines. One of the things that came up today is as you brought up employers and educational institutions reopening, and I'm wondering if you've developed a plan for partnering with employers and other regional stakeholders and educational institutions to get riders back on transit. Something that was shared today from one of our large employers was, as people start staggering back to work, one of the concerns is that there's going to be more parking available, and that more people are therefore going to drive to the office because there's more parking. So just wondering how y'all are developing plans to support both employers and other stakeholders like our, colleges and universities to get back on metro and bus.
Yes, we are developing a whole campaign, as you can imagine, both internally and externally. But the first thing that in our campaign we have to show that we're safe, because and we've done literally surveys and focus groups, and until people feel safe, you could offer it free. That's not going to change the needle, right? It's not going to move the needle. So that's going to be the first messaging, and that's the thing we have to get everyone sort of on the same page on that. Again, businesses, education institutions, that hey, this is a safe way to get here first. Then there may be other issues. Obviously, if we can then work on the headways. And work on the hours, right? All those things that will give people, okay, now not only first it's safe and I will use it, but now it's convenient for me to use. So that's the next part of this. But I have had some conversations with different business leaders of different things that we may want to do, whether it's some sort of a joint campaign, whether it's some sort of either financial or other type of incentive program that way, a reintroduction, let us reintroduce you to Metro type of things, those types of things. So we will be creating that. It's also a matter of when the timing of that is, because a lot of this will be dollars. So we want to spend those when people are of that mindset, when they really are starting to think and make those decisions. Right now, I don't believe we're right there right now. I think once the vaccine gets out further in the community and we start to really see that uptick, particularly on the rail side, because that number is, literally I get a number every day and it is not moving. And so the bus has, and for a number of reasons, even that is now in effect a little plateaued quite a bit over the last, after we started charging and we went back to front door boarding, that has sort of plateaued a bit. It's probably the most important thing we have to do, but I think the timing of that is critical. So we have to do we are doing some spade work now, and we'll have to do more. But I'm looking for any opportunities that you have to get us in front of people, other partners. Obviously, I'm dealing with some of the bigger groups right now, Greater Washington Partnership, Washington Board of Trade, things like that, the chambers. Those are the ones that we will reach out to first. But then I think we ought to go deeper than that. So anything that you can help us do that, I would appreciate.
No, I appreciate that. And timing, I know it's important, but would love to hear more and hopefully support any incentives that have worked in DC, right, to get the long-term strategy. I want to get our ridership back and the roads not as busy. So thank you.
Thank you. Chairman McKay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your report, Paul. First, to commend you on foregoing the subsidy increase. I think that's realistic. Obviously, all of us involved in government are challenged right now to be able to meet our needs. Also want to thank the board for protecting the capital program. Having been on the Metro board at a period of time where that wasn't happening, much to my frustration, we all know now that can take decades to fix, and so we can't dig a hole deeper just because it's convenient to do so. And I know that takes discipline, so I want to commend you and the board for that. Kind of following up on Supervisor Palchik's comments, I really think we're going to have to heavily market people back into the system. And my fear is, and I guess the question is, are we starting early enough? We know that the president's declared that every adult who would like to be vaccinated, now we have a date. Hopefully that's successful. So we kind of know when that will come. And certainly when that comes, we expect a lot of businesses, federal government, others to reopen. And I think a lot of these people who have been staying at home have forgotten how bad traffic can be. And they're gonna reckon with that pretty quickly. And so, you know, I know this isn't a flip a switch, everything's back to normal, but we should be looking at that date that the president has put out, working backwards from that and saying, how long do we need to mark it up, ramp up our messaging to get people back on the train? Maybe 1 or 2 times trying to commute in their car. They'll be much more open to it. And so I never think it's too soon to start that. I'm glad we're surveying people right now. But I would just encourage you, knowing how long it takes to have a real sophisticated marketing campaign sink in with people. I think there's a lot of ears right now out there wanting to hear things about what's going to happen and how Metro is going to be a player in helping people get back to work. So that's an encouragement. And really my question, not surprisingly, has to do with the Silver Line. Obviously, we're hearing conflicting information about when that will be substantially completed, what the testing period of time is going to be, how we might be able to shorten that. I really feel like the Silver Line is an important part of rebuilding the ridership program for Metro. And clearly, you know, any delays in that beyond what is reasonable, I think are going to hurt your ridership numbers substantially worse. I think because that's a new line, because there's a lot of interest around it, I think there's a lot of demand for it. But we've got to get that Silver Line open as soon as we can. And so if you could give us any type of update on, you know, when substantial completion is going to be done. I know there's some outstanding issues with MWA, but can we compress the testing period of time so that we can get that line open as soon as possible?
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. On your first issue, you're right. I mean, to be frank, we were thinking at the time, meaning 3 days ago, before the president just came out and said that he picked up 2 months, we were looking more at the August school and everything really coming back at that time is sort of that seemed to be where people were starting to focus on. But now with this news, we've got to, you know, as you mentioned, we've got to sort of rethink, all right, now let's start to move, maybe it's more of a summer. The other part of that is, as you know, in this region is tourism. So there, you know, that's the other side, you know, so it's good to work with the businesses and the schools, but that tourism element's huge for us. So do we see that coming this summer or not? You know, so that's even, we're reaching out to, you know, the hospitality community, the aviation community to sort of coordinate those efforts because they're in the same position we are. You know, they want to get the tourists coming in as well as business. So I hear you very, very loudly, and it is something just given the recent news in the last few days that we've got to recalibrate. So I appreciate that. In terms of Silver Line Phase 2, there is not a, you know, anything that's going to happen over the next 10 plus years is not a bigger thing that's going to happen to this region. I mean, we all know what happened with Amazon, right? But besides Amazon, I mean, that project, we've got to get that up and running as quick as we can. It means so much to the region. It means so much to our customer, for our customers. It's going to provide tremendous access to the airport. But those types of jobs and the types of commutes that those people will do is one that you know isn't into the core commute. So that's why it's so important for us to get that up and running. So we're working literally. I talked to Jack Potter. I had a call to him a little early today. Constantly, what can we do to get this done? You know, but we also know that there's some issues there. And so we're saying, look, we will do everything in our power. Literally, we have given spare parts, in effect, used our parts to get at issues that they need to solve because they can't get them from vendors quick enough because of the pandemic. So we're doing things like that to speed this up as quick as we can. There are some core issues that they still need to have addressed that are pure safety issues, to be frank. There's a cross bond issue, and there's some things there that there is no room there. And to be frank, the MSC, the Safety Commission, would never allow us to operate until those things are solved. So that's the biggest thing. And some of that is material based, to be frank, and that's why we've basically opened up our storehouse to help them with that. So we'll continue to do that. My hope is that substantial completion date is reached as quick as it can, as soon as they're ready. Again, that's not our call. That's between the vendor and MWA to do that. And as soon as that's done, we're going to do everything in our power to get the testing, to get that all lined up and to be open as quick as we can. So that's our philosophy with it. And literally, I have people working directly with their contractor and with MWA to make sure that there's nothing that we're holding up from getting this thing done. And so that is what we want to do.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. And let me just close by saying I think all of us on this call know what a difficult position you're in, how hard this is. I think the financial numbers speak for themselves, and so a lot of hard choices to be made. But always appreciate your openness and partnership as we get through this together. We're literally all in this together when it comes to Metro, and so and please. Use NVTC, call on any of us anytime to provide any type of support you need to get us to the end goal here, which is, back to a better situation, much better situation with ridership and a much better financial picture as a result of that. So we're all in on that and here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. All right, I saw Mr. DeFerranti, and we'll go to Mr. Aguirre, Mr. Snyder, and then I'm trying to get each jurisdiction in once before I get to jurisdictions twice. So Ms. Garvey and Mr. Alcorn, I see you guys too. Got you in the queue. All right, Mr. Wedefield, or excuse me, Mr. DeFerranti with questions for Mr. Wedefield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wedefield, thank you for being here and for the presentation. I really appreciated the comments on safety with respect to testing. You know that over the last, I think, 10 days or so, the governors and the mayor put forward a letter talking about vaccinations and frontline workers. Have you got to a plan for vaccinating Metro workers and thought that through?
We have offered to basically, if we were to get the vaccine, we could give the shots. We have the capability to do that. Now, not maybe with the entire workforce at that scale, but we have certain priorities. As you can imagine, our police force was done early. One of our highest priority right now is the Rail Operation Control Center, because there is no backup plan for that, to be frank, if that goes down because of the nature of that work. And it takes a year to be experienced to even do some of that work. So that is one that I've reached out to all three jurisdictions and the federal government to please help me get those people. We will go pick up the vaccine, or we will take the people to the vaccine, whatever it takes to get them. That's roughly about 150 people total. That is just critical that we get that done. We have worked with the VAMS, which is the CDC operation. We've sent people out to the operation they have out in Dulles, right by Dulles, where they were doing a number of that. So we've sent a number of people there. We're working with Maryland. We're working with the district. As you know, they all have different, sort of approaches to this. So we will continue to work with all of them. But particularly on the Rail Operation Control Center, that's probably the one that we are working the hardest on right now.
Thank you. We're all facing those questions of how do you, amongst your workforce, how do you want to prioritize everyone? So just appreciate it.
Folks who are one deep seems like a good priority to start with. All right, Councilman Aguirre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, General Manager Wedefield, thanks again for being with us tonight. I have a comment and a question. My comment is kind of a combination of Chairman McKay and Supervisor Palchuk. I do agree that, some of the outreach to encourage people to come back and show the safety is important. And combining with Supervisor Palchuk's comment, I think it's also important to make sure that we are prioritizing as well different languages, right? So making sure that we are doing some targeting in Spanish and some of the other major languages that are spoken in the DMV. And just one more thing on that, to make sure that we are trying to simplify the message as much as possible. Infographics, I know that WMATA has definitely utilized some of them, but I just can't stress enough how effective infographics can be to make sure that a message is getting across clearly, quickly, and that it is retained by the person that sees it. So that's just a quick comment on that one. My question is, I know that WMATA is developing a low-income fare pass pilot with the district, and right here in Alexandria, we're doing something similar with passes for Dash. How can local jurisdictions or the Commonwealth work with WMATA on ways to reduce barriers to transit, reduce fare evasion, and promote transit equity?
I think this is something that the board has been wrestling with as well, is, whether we have I think this effort that we're doing with the district, I think is an important one. We can learn from it. What is that level that maybe that either, whether it's a level of income, whether it's the level of the fare, what's the combination? If there is one combination, how do we focus that? So I know it's something that the board has considered. I think obviously with the free bus, the no bus fare for sort of pushed it, a little bit to the side, I think, but it's something that the board has as an issue that they want to address going forward. So I think you will be seeing more of that as we sort of, start, again, think about the next, the trains of the future in the region. So I do think that it will be a large part of it because the board has put tremendous focus on equity, across the system at a number of levels, and fair being one of them, service obviously being another, hours of service being another, but where it goes and how often it goes. Because again, different markets need different things, and particularly for people that have that are just basically barred from getting either to better jobs or maintaining jobs because of these issues. So these are all issues that the board and we are working on now, just so you do know. Nothing specific right now, again, that we do have that one effort underway, but it is something that the board is going to be moving forward to, I believe, in the near future, to be frank.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Mr. Snyder next in the queue, I think.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all your work. So I want to focus on the proposed budget, which is the FY22 budget, which is raises a number of very serious concerns. The notion of spending at a level not justified by your ridership in the first half of the year, spending through your money, and then having virtually none of it left for the second half is not the way that I manage my personal budgets and not the way our city manages its budget. So at the Q3 and Q4, in my view, is irrational and unsupportable. And with 30-minute headways and closing 22 stations, I can't go to my taxpayers and say they should continue to support Metro. I can't. So I think you've listened to all the voices. It's good that you're moving forward on the silver line. Good that you're not rating capital expenditures for operations. But I'm not sure you've heard our voice. So let me be clear. My citizens will not support Metro with the budget proposal that you have in front of you, with the closed stations, which will no doubt be at least one of the two that serve our citizens. And 30-minute headways is not really a rail system at all. I don't know what that is. So the notion that you would spend at a very high level just to drop off the cliff in mid-year, it seems to me is irrational and irresponsible and nothing that I could ever advocate supporting. So I just want to put that marker down as clearly as I can, that has got to be changed. I realize the hope is that money and make the predictions for Q3 and Q4 not as bad. I think the budget is the architecture is so fundamentally flawed that, again, I can't go to my citizens and say they should continue to support Metro with that kind of a budget architecture. So you can comment on that if you'd like. I want to be very clear. You're going to hear that, but I want you to understand this is very serious. I've supported Metro for longer than in this commission, as have my citizens. That budget, as you have proposed it, is nothing that I could advocate for in any way, shape, or form. So you can respond if you want, but I wanted to put that marker down. On a more positive note, we tell me a little bit more about integration and bus service.
Mr. Snyder, could I just briefly interrupt you? I'm sorry, for anyone who is not currently speaking, even if you are on deck, we really do need you to mute. It makes it really hard for the speaker. So if you wouldn't mind just taking, I'm seeing a couple of not muted symbols. Just double check, even if you think you are on mute, and confirm that your computer is, so that we can hear Mr. Snyder's second question. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I understand that you're working closely with the district on bus issues there, and I'm wondering what you're doing in regards to sort of remapping the entire bus system in the region. So you can respond to my first comment if you care to, and the second question. Thank you. You're on mute, Mr. Wiedefeld.
After I asked you to mute, you still are. My apologies. Oh, I wonder, is it possible that our commission staff muted everyone? It did help us hear Mr. Snyder, so it achieved that goal.
I don't
Okay,
think
Mr. Whitfield,
I'm
I think
good
you're
now. Sorry, I didn't do that. I feel like the gentleman on the Golden Globes the other day. No, I sorry, Mr. Snyder, or Mayor Snyder. I mean, you've been one of the strongest supporters for Metro, and I've had the pleasure of working with you on a number of issues. So I totally respect your comments. The two things. One is to spread out the dollars, in effect, to spread out the dollars in some way. Two things would have to occur. One is, in effect, we'd have to start laying off people now because of the way that our budget works, with over 70% of our budget being driven by labor. That's where we'd have to save money. So that's very difficult. The other is that the act that was passed in December, the intent is not to do that. To get those dollars is to keep people employed. So that's sort of the little bit of the box that we're in. So but we're also obviously thinking that there is this other, set of dollars coming. So we couldn't assume those dollars and build a budget that shows them it's coming because we don't have it yet. On the other hand, we couldn't create a budget that basically laid off, I don't know, little hundreds, if not thousands of people. At the same time, we're asking for the money that's designed to keep people employed. So that was part of the challenge that we faced. But I totally understand, and I appreciate none of us want to be there in the third quarter. That is not where we want to be. It's not the system that we all want. So I appreciate it. On the second issue, the bus transformation effort that was started about 18 months ago, that is now moving into the next phase, which is basically, as you mentioned, sort of looking at the entire system. That was underway pre-COVID. It was just getting off the ground. I think now is even it's more important that we do that because of the changing travel behavior that we want, and also the greater focus on equity. So I think now is the perfect time to be looking at the entire bus structure with the local governments and the state and the Commonwealth and the district to basically make sure that is the system that we all want together. So that effort is just getting underway in terms of really starting to get down to the nitty gritty of that. Again, doing that in this COVID environment is, I would prefer to do it where we're meeting with lots of people. But so that is maybe holding it back a little bit, but it's something that we've got to do. And the timing couldn't be better now, given what we're all facing.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Alcorn and then Ms. Garvey.
Thank you very much, Chair Crystal. Yeah, just a comment and then a question. And by the way, I want to thank my colleagues for flagging some of the issues, starting with Supervisor Palchik. I'm totally on board with those comments as well. My comment, though, specific to your presentation, relates to the Title VI analysis being done for phase 2. I know the idea right now is to use demographic data from wheelie riders. I'm not sure that makes the most sense, and I'll tell you, the problem is if you actually look at the communities around the new sites, and I'll only speak to the Fairfax County ones. Hutchinson Elementary is a Title I school with 94% minority. Dogwood Elementary is a Title I school with 75% minority population. These are the attendance areas surrounding these new stations. So I would hope that would be taken into consideration. I encourage you to look at it that way as well. My question is, you raised some big questions at the end of your presentation about the long-term future and what we're going to see. And I know none of us know the future. I do want to say, those of us involved in local government and who do land use, and some of us are involved in some, reviewing some of our comprehensive plans, haven't given up on transit-oriented development. Let's don't do that, please. But I think it's also prudent, and I do appreciate you talking openly about the future and how things may be different. I guess my question is, when you start to look at revenue models that are not as dependent on rush hour fares for commuters, for example, how much time do you need in advance to start discussing serious alternatives in terms of either fare strategies or revenue strategies? Getting beyond just the fare box and at least for us, the real estate tax, which is really paying most everybody. How much, I mean, is it 6 months, a year? Because, this may take a while to come back.
True. If I may, just on your first issue, yes, we are looking. We have reached out to make sure that we're understanding all the communities all the way along the line. The model that we have, unfortunately, is one that is something that you've developed with the FTA, and they give you approval to it. So that it's based on ridership surveys. Where do people come? Where do they go? So, and we get it. It's a difficult because now you have this new, these new lines that aren't there. So how do you survey people that obviously aren't there? One of the things that we have done, though, is we've also used the data from Reagan Airport, because, again, we do feel a lot of that is transferable to particularly the Dulles station. So we are trying to make sure that we're doing, showing as best we can what the future system will look like and what people will behave in that. As you can imagine, that's difficult, but we do have a survey base that we do, that we're using that on. But Mr. Letourneau's, stressed to us that we make sure that we reach out, we really understand these communities, and make sure we're putting that into our analysis. So that is underway, just so you do know. And in terms of the sort of rethinking this, I think it is not something that's going to happen in 2 months, and I think it's probably a year type discussion, to be frank. Because things are going to be changing around us very quickly. Again, just in the last few days, the whole needle just moved potentially, 2 months, where I think there was a general feeling, the business community people I was talking to. Again, I talked quite a bit with the aviation and the hospitality industry, because the workers that's fairly straightforward, right? But that other element, which is so important to our region and to our system, we really are looking at that. So how does this play into that? So I think it's probably about a year effort to really go through that, and it's going to take a lot of people involved, to be frank, because these are big. There's so many levels of issues we need to deal with. Obviously from the tremendous focus that we're all putting on equity now, that's got to be central to our thinking of this now. It should have been, to be frank, decades ago, but now that it is, we need to do it. We need to attack it. The financial impacts obviously is an issue, but the environmental and what we're trying to achieve on that side, what we're trying to achieve on the economy, what we're trying to do to support some of these, again, depending on how the marketplace plays out in lots of ways, whether it's the retail side of the house or the office, all those things could start to gel, or we need to understand those to say, now, how do we support those, right? Because that's what we're here to do. So I think all that's got to be put into it. So again, I wouldn't want to rush it and say we have the answer, but on the other hand, we have to start to move on it too. I think, right now we're in the throes of dealing with some very, very serious issues, both on the health side and on the, the immediate financial thing we're facing in front of us. But now we also have to, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We have to look at these other things as well. And that's what we're planning to do.
Well, Paul, thank you so much, not only for your short-term leadership, but obviously you're looking at the long term, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, Mr. Wiedefeld, thank you so much for coming. It's getting late and it's been a long week for you, I'm sure. I want to second everything Chairman McKay said. Really appreciate the work that you've done, really challenging times. I know Mr. Snyder has trouble with the budget, but given everything, it looks like a reasonable approach to me, and it's just these got to be tough times. And I do also want to say, I think we're all standing ready to help and support and get people back. But I'd like to bring up a subject that's a little bit not quite so pleasant, and I'm sure you were probably prepared to talk about it, and that, the article in the Post about the Rail Operations Control Center and the safety issues and the bad climate that persists there. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you're planning to do there?
Yes, thank you. A number of things. One of the things that we did a few months ago is basically that now reports directly to me. It was under, an operations side of the house. I have put together a team there. Basically, the team that we have there they have full access to any part of the organization. So literally, we have moved people from training to communications to HR to IT. Literally, that they get up every day now, and that's where they work. Whereas this used to be part of their job, right? So we literally said, you have the entire organization at your disposal, obviously some consulting help as well. We did recruit a new head of the ROC, a gentleman that basically was responsible for the safety of the tower program for the FAA. So excellent addition. So that gentleman's there. We're focusing on, we're trying to create there a just culture, if you can follow me with that, but that's really what we have to do to change this. We can't go in there and say, well, you did it wrong, so you're going to be penalized, which, to be frank, has been sort of our approach for years. And it is a very stressful job. The way that we've structured the work hours is not, it's just not realistic. And it's been, again, 40 years of building this way, but the whole thing has to be reframed, to be frank. And that's what we're doing. So it's everything from how we train, where we recruit, what we pay. I mean, just all these just basic things that to be frank, we weren't paying as much attention as we should. It's, there's no excuse for it. And that's what we're doing. And we will get there. I mean, it will never be perfect. We have humans. They will, unfortunately, there will be times when things go wrong. But I can tell you that culture, the focus that we have on that, I go there on a regular basis. We have a board member who's the head of safety for the Federal Rail Administration as part of that effort. So literally, we are turning that. We have turned it, to be frank, already, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you. That's good to hear. It was clear that, when you got a culture, like changing culture takes a while. And obviously that's what you need to do. And it sounds like a good approach, and we'll look forward to hearing more, in a number of months, but appreciate that response. Thank you. That's helpful.
All right. Well, while anyone thinks about whether they have final questions, I'd love to ask one of my own. So, we talked a little bit already about the budget and candidly what a moving target it is, right? I think you'd be forgiven if you weren't breathlessly following our consent agenda right before we turned to you, but you saw we're wrestling with that at this commission level, right? How far can we go if our usual budget adoption process is considerably earlier in the year? We're figuring out our own inputs, and we're a much smaller organization that's not running service. I know, back home in our jurisdictions, we're each grappling with budgets that we know are going to change. All of that said, I think the reaction that Mr. Snyder had, though we as a commission may be in different places on the sort of smoothing strategy, and I think you've talked about, why that really isn't feasible for the system. But the reaction you heard is one that we are all hearing from our constituents, and the sort of sense that we have catastrophe looming in Q3 and Q4. The question is, to the extent, obviously, WMATA needs to deliver a budget to the federal partners, to us as local payers, and yet this is going to be a much more iterative exercise than it is in the best of times. How are you thinking about, if at all, how to iterate again? The big public engagement process that you all do, I can imagine can't be easily replicated every 3 to 6 months, but the system learned a little bit, as you had to iterate on fiscal 21. For constituents who are concerned, for our colleagues who are concerned, how can we tell them what checkpoints could they maybe expect to see again MATA before, these draconian cuts would immediately befall us in Q3 or Q4? What checkpoints would we have about all the opportunities to head those off, whether it's return of wide ridership, federal aid, or otherwise?
Sure. Thank you. Just a little bit on the process. Our process calls for, meaning the federal process when we do public outreach, is we cannot, if we cut service, we have to go back out and we'd have to start all this again. So again, the board's philosophy and our philosophy was, what we recommend is, look, we'd rather go out with that, and then it's much easier to bring things back in. And that is exactly what played out in the 21 budget, if you recall. We actually had to go out and it was draconian cuts, but that's what we were facing. And that was a reality that we could face that. And that's what we put out there. But then we were able to pull back as that money came in and basically we were doing it. So I think that you will definitely, at a minimum, on a quarterly basis, we will be revising the budget. So there's two big things that are facing us that we will know hopefully in the April timeframe, April and first quarter. Hopefully by April, we'll know what just playing out right now on the Hill. Right, we'll know one way or the other what that looks like, I think. So that'll give us a sense. Okay, is now we moving in this direction or that direction? The other is obviously the vaccine, and if that takes off, where we are literally where people by the end of May are vaccinated, again, that's a whole different set of data points for us, right? And then we will then say, okay, now let's revise the budget to do this. Again, it's much easier to bring back. That we can do. You can't do it overnight, but at least we can say, let's bring it back. We don't have to go back out to the public. And if you recall, when we prepared the 21 budget, our ridership was up, our credibility with the customers was up, and we were proposing things like on weekends and things of that sort that were designed to build up ridership. So that is where we want to be. And that's what's driving us, is to get to that and to get there as soon as we can, within the construct of how do you do that in a balanced budget right now with all these unknowns that we've never dealt with, ever. I mean, it's something we've never dealt with. But I think that the board's been extremely, forward thinking and realistic, but then also being very flexible and adjusting. So I think it's to their credit that they've said, no, we're going to have to make some hard decisions, but we're going to move very quickly if we can and when we can. And they did that in the 21 budget. And I think that'll carry forward with the 22 budget. I'm going to remain very positive. I think that there's, a very good future for us all. And I think that we've got to hold to it. But let us work through this. But I think for the public, clearly in April, we'll have a better sense of where we are. I think in the July, which is the beginning of our fiscal year, I think in July, we'll have a much better, vision of what the real 22 budget looks like. And I think that's when we'll go to the board and say, here's what we're recommending at those times.
That's helpful. April, July, those are pretty specific. And so I think, maybe the challenge I can then turn as the commission, in partnership with our pretty crackerjack communications team here, is to think about, Mr. Wiedefield, you rightfully sort of drew the connection between ridership return and credibility. And while I very much agree with the strategy of better to add service than take it back, I do think, because I'm seeing it, that it does erode WMATA's credibility a little bit, or a lot of it, when it sort of seems like this recurrent push out to the public about we have to end Metro service as you know it, right? The message, of course, around December was that we needed the federal government to act, lest these effects have to go into effect in July. Now we're saying, we've got that relief and we're waiting for these things, and we still have to advertise these really rough sounding cuts for January. I do think, and again, because I've heard it, unfortunately, it contributes to this idea that, quote, WMATA can't manage its budget. I think that's a fair sensibility. I think we're all dealing with, as you said, something truly unprecedented. But there are consequences to, advertising the worst and amending the best. So I think maybe that's something we can help with as the commission, to be able to say to our riders and our jurisdictions and those with whom we have relationships, this is, just the smallest insight into how the sausage making works. This is why the WMATA budget is structured this way. Here are the checkpoints we're looking for in April and July. Here's everything we're working for as a region to make sure these cuts don't come to pass. I think you're absolutely right that we want to be, exceeding expectations, but telling the public repeatedly that we have to entertain cuts that would dramatically affect their quality of life and their ability to get around can erode people's confidence in coming back to the system. So I should opine on all of that because I think it's a challenge for us as commissioners and partners, along with WMATA. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, we've put you through the ringer. We appreciate you tremendously. We appreciate your time and coming to visit with us. Mr. Sniper is amazing in answering all of our questions as the board chair, but there's nothing like having the general manager with us. We really appreciate your making the time.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Thanks again. Okay. From Paul to Paul, Mr. Smedberg. Shall I turn it back to you for the WMATA board report?
Well, thank you, Chair Crystal. Unfortunately, after that great buildup you had earlier, I think the general manager really had a lot to say, and Matt and I probably don't have too much to add. I will say that Paul and his team this past year have really been working extremely hard to manage all of this. With the capital projects, with all the safety initiatives, with the budgetary challenges, and everything else that we have to deal with interjurisdictionally and with all our partners, including the federal government and Congress. It's been a really challenging year and a half, and Paul and his team have, in my view, a little biased, but they really have done an amazing job just managing all the issues and tackling things head on. So I want to let people know that, and Mr. Letourneau and I really appreciate the time that Mr. Wiedefeld and his team and staff give to us to answer questions, to deal with the issues that we know that are important to you. And it's a lot, and I've been spending a lot of time with our jurisdictional partners in the Hill, making sure that Metro is and transit in general is near the top of their list, and how important it is to this region. So Matt and I basically wanted to let people know that the board is in the middle of its budget process for this coming fiscal year 22, which the general manager outlined for you, the operating and capital budgets, and it's further summarized in your meeting material. There's been a lot, as we said, covered by the general manager, so I'm not sure there's really much more that I can add personally. We'd also like to remind everyone that WMATA public comment period for the fiscal year 22 budget is currently open, and it closes on March 16th. So get your comments in, as individuals or as jurisdictions, and I'm sure the commission itself will have comments. There's also a Virginia-focused virtual public hearing on Wednesday, March 10th at 6 p.m. I believe Mr. Alcorn will be joining me that day in co-chairing that hearing. Also wanted to let people know the past few years, WMATA and the jurisdictional staff have been negotiating a new 6-year capital funding agreement, the CFA. The last 6 years, the agreement was for fiscal year 10 through 15. And we've been operating on either 1-year agreement extensions since that time. We feel that's, the board, feels that's really, not acceptable, and have really been encouraging the jurisdictions to come together and really come to some agreement. I think you all are almost there, and want to applaud NVTC staff and jurisdictional staff in their efforts to help see this to the end. It'll obviously reflect improvements to the capital budget and the dedicated funding. And we anticipate that the board will approve this, I believe it's in April timeframe. So we very much look forward to receiving that and being able to approve that document. And really, that's all we have, Chair Crystal, for you this evening.
Thank you so much. Why don't I go actually to keep us flowing to the WMATA committee for comments, and then we can handle if there are any more questions for you, Paul, as our representative,
Yep.
or the Commonwealth representative on the Metro Board. Because we also do, as I turn it over to Mr. Aguirre, who chairs our WMATA committee, we do have the one action item here. As we started discussing last month, we have our comments on the fiscal 22 budget that we want to discuss a little more in context of these two reports too. So Mr. Aguirre, over to you. Are you on mute, Kenneth? Is Kenneth still with us? I'm looking for. Okay. Well, the good news is that we have Mr. Doivetter, who staffs the WMATA committee. I think I saw him earlier, and I don't know if either a member of our NVTC staff would like to comment about the discussions at WMATA committee, or if there is a member of that committee that has anything to add about the past month's meeting or further discussions about the budget letter.
I'm happy to keep us moving unless someone else would like to jump in.
Steve, thank you so much, Mr. Doivetter.
Yeah.
No problem. So there is an action item before the commission this evening, which is to authorize Chair Crystal to send comments to WMATA on the fiscal 22 operating and capital budget and the FY 22 to 27 capital improvement program. At the last commission meeting and the last NVTC WMATA committee meeting, the groups, respective groups, discussed themes to guide staff comments in a letter. The themes, which I believe are on the next slide, are also in your meeting materials, and these reflect input that we heard from the commissioners at the last February commission meeting. As we continue to monitor what happens in the federal space that the general manager mentioned, Chair Aguirre will work with Chair Crystal to draft the letters of comments, which incorporates these themes, and then staff will submit it by the due date of March 16th. And as always, we encourage each jurisdiction to provide their individual FY22 budget comments to WMATA, especially if they get down to that bus route level. That is the extent of the report this evening. So it's back to you, Chair Crystal.
Beautifully done, Mr. Doivetter. Thank you. And Kenneth, I'm
No
so sorry.
problem.
That is the Murphy's Law, that if you're going to get booted off the meeting or lose your internet connection, it is going to be exactly when the chair turns to you for comment. So Mr. Doivetter capably stepped in to give a bit of a summary of the WMATA committee and the kind of major recommended themes in our WMATA letter. Was there anything that you'd want to add from the discussion of the NVTC WMATA committee?
No, I caught the tail end. I think Andrew did a great job of summarizing everything we were taking care of. I guess the thing that I always like to add at the end is just, the subcommittee meeting is always open to everyone, so everyone's always welcome to join us. I don't believe we set the next meeting yet, but when we do, we'll let everyone know. So,
Great.
and
Thank you.
I don't know what my laptop's been doing, but it likes to just turn off on me, and it's happened during council meetings too. So my apologies to everyone.
No problem. This is why we tag team, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let me throw it open for questions either for our WMATA committee or Mr. Smedberg on behalf of the WMATA board. I think we probably got a lot of our WMATA questions surfaced in the prior item on our agenda meeting with Mr. Wiedefield, so there may not be others. But just looking for any questions or any feedback about these themes. Yeah, Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thanks a lot. I think the slide well captures the discussion at the WMATA committee, so thank you for that. Our chair and staff did a really great job in capturing, I think, the principal themes. I would like a bit of strengthening on number 3, and just as examples of the kind of reductions we're concerned with, it would be closing stations and a 30-minute headway. If we could cite those as examples of the generic point that we're making, that would be very important from my standpoint. But again, I think the points are all the points that were discussed in the WMATA committee. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I see Ms. Matthijs taking a note. Absolutely. And I should note too, I know staff was taking notes throughout the conversation with Mr. Wiedefield, and we'll have an opportunity to incorporate some of what they heard from the overall commission as well into that letter that Mr. Aguirre and I will edit together. Okay, so unless there are any other comments or questions,
Sure,
we actually do. Oh, please. I'm sorry. Who did I miss?
This is Paul, Katie.
Oh, hello. Take it away.
I just wanted to say, to let folks know, I know it's come up a couple times this evening, the whole idea of, the future of transit, the future of Metro, how we fit into the whole recovery, of the region, and working with the jurisdictions in the future, how transit evolves and work patterns and travel patterns and all that. So we are embarking on a whole strategic planning process that is underway. And Mr. Wiedefeld and his team are also looking at various aspects of that. The board is going to be engaging in the next couple of weeks on a formal process to do all that. So I just wanted to let folks know.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear there's sort of a structure to organize that enormous swirl of questions that are weighing.
Yeah, I wanted to start it sooner, but with this, our new engagement and not having actually a building to go to because of the fire, it's made it a little difficult, but we are starting the next week or two. So
excellent. Well, good. We'll look forward to hearing more about that. Okay, so I actually, if we could click forward, I think it's forward, not back. One more to this summary of the WMATA committee key themes slide. I think it might be helpful to have that up because, I'm going to actually call for a vote on this. So I know perhaps a little unusual to vote on themes, but again, what we're sort of, what I'm looking for a motion for is to authorize the chair, i.e. me, to send generally these comments inclusive of the good feedback we just got from Mr. Snyder, and then any other kind of major themes from the discussion with Paul Wiedefield onto WMATA as a formal letter on the fiscal 22 budget in time for their deadline of March 16th.
Madam Chair, this is Senator Eben, and I'd make that motion.
Thank you very much.
Second Supervisor Alcorn.
Okay, seconded by Supervisor Alcorn. Unless there is further discussion.
In the General Assembly, we call this voting on concept.
Oh, I like that. It seems lofty. All right, so I'm going to turn it to our secretary to call the roll for a vote on the concept.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker. Mr. Dave Ferranti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Corn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Palchik. Ms. Palchik. Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Really good discussion, I think, on one of our most important jobs as the commission, which is WMATA oversight on behalf of our constituents in Northern Virginia. So moving on to the General Assembly session update, which some of our commissioners have lived. Welcome back, everyone, virtually, if not literally, from what I know is a breakneck session that you all concluded on Monday. Just a special thank you before I hand it off to this team. Zach Smith and Tinley O'Hara on the NVTC staff really worked overtime to keep us up to date on legislative and budget developments, which have been fast moving. So we so often turn to Amy as our eyes and ears in Richmond. And it was really Zach and Tenley who were helping be maybe the voice back to us on the commission. So we appreciate you all. Amy, goodness knows we appreciate you. And so I'm going to turn to you actually for a wrap up on the General Assembly session, followed by any comments that our General Assembly members would like to add. And then after that, we'll turn to Kate for a quick federal update too.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Happy to be here tonight to give you a brief presentation about sort of where we ended up with session this year. As you know, we were sort of following most closely two bills that were, while not transportation related, were certainly commission related. One was Senate Bill 1271, which Senator McPike carried with the able assistance of Delegate Sullivan on the House side. That allowed public bodies to be able to meet electronically during a pandemic. And so I'm happy to report that that bill has passed and is headed to the governor for his signature, which we are very happy about. House Bill 1931, which is another bill we were following with Delegate Levine, which was put forward by our very own Elizabeth Bennett Parker, which allows for greater ability for members to be able to participate electronically in meetings for the illness of a family member and increase the amount of time for personal reasons. That bill has actually already been signed by the governor and will go into effect on July 1st. And then finally, we were also following HJ 542, which is patroned by Delegate McQuinn, which was a transit equity study. That bill also has passed, and in the end, it went through a couple different changes, which I'm sure Director Mitchell can talk about later. But first, the Senate tried to move it over to JLARC, and then JLARC said they didn't have the capacity to do this transit study, so they moved it back to DRPT, which I think is where everybody thought it should be to begin with. So that is back there, and that bill also is final. And then obviously the biggest piece I think that we were working on this year, which was the was budget amendments and budget issues. And you know, we actually had a good year again. I mean, I think it wasn't a big transportation year, but certainly we were able to use in the General Assembly in the final budget approved quite a bit of coronavirus COVID CARES Act money to be used for transportation projects. And I'll run through those very quickly for you. So the biggest obviously one that we were working on, which was the NVTC one, where we had asked for assistance for our jurisdictions and one-time funds to be able to help pay their Metro bill. That was allocated to us. Part of it, we were able to get close to hopefully $10 million, which is a huge deal. And that was part of the 32.4 million that's going to be headed to DRPT. Part of that will be used to fill the capital fund hole that we have in the budget. And so whatever's left over will be used for the NVTC jurisdiction. So that's approximately around $10 million. And so we're really excited about that. And obviously a big thanks to Speaker Philicorn, as well as Paul Kruzik and the other members of the General Assembly and Senator Eben, who carried those amendments for us and helped push it through both on the Senate side and the House side. I know it was a tough lift, and we really couldn't have done it without them, especially on the inside. So huge help to those folks for helping us in the budget process there. Also, $83.5 million was granted out of that same coronavirus money to extend interpassenger rail down in the Roanoke-Blacksburg area, which is also very exciting. It's sort of the part of the rail transformation project we have here in Virginia. 83.5 million is going to be allocated to the Commonwealth for the VRE Manassas line, which again, part of that rail transformation piece, which we're also really excited about. I know VRE is excited about that part, and that is money that goes to the Commonwealth for them to be able to kind of continue to work on that Norfolk Southern line. So that's also great news. $10.9 million was established for a pilot program for fare-free transit, as well as part of that money, $900,000 will be used to help pay for that transit equity study for DRPT. So there's funds allocated out of that line amendment for that study. And then finally, there's a $10 million for an urban smart infrastructure test partnership with the city of Fort Worth and Virginia Tech. And so those were all the sort of transit related items in the budget that we've been following, and which is sort of, again, really good stuff happening in our area and for us. So with that, I'm happy to end and have anybody else pipe in if they like, and happy to answer any questions from the members as well.
Thank you so much, Ms. Parent-Seibert. All right, let me also open the floor to our members of the General Assembly for any additions. I want to echo Amy's deep thanks to our commissioners, whom we are also so fortunate to have in leadership roles in the General Assembly, for your advocacy on certainly the funding issue, which took a number of twists and turns, and we're happy to see that land, as well as the many other priorities for the commission that you helped shepherd, as well as everything else you've done this past session. So any comments or adds from those of you in the General Assembly?
Madam Chair, this is Sullivan.
Please.
I just want to take a moment to make sure the members know what terrific representation they get down in Richmond. Amy does a great job. SB, we gave her a bit of a heart attack at very late in the session on SB 1271. Late in the game, the House sort of threw a curveball. But she kept her cool, and we worked it out, and everything turned out just fine. But she does a terrific job, and I just wanted to thank her for all the work she does now.
Excellent.
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Krizak.
Yes, sir.
I would definitely echo Delegate Sullivan's comments there about Amy. She really thinks outside the box. What you probably the story behind getting that extra $10 million. We started, obviously we wanted the full 30 million, but it was not in either the House or the Senate budget. And to get a budget allocation out of the final conference report that wasn't in either budget doesn't happen very often. And I think Amy is she's deserving of a big round of applause for that. And I will say having the speaker here helps a lot too. So I think that's without speaking outside of school here, there was a lot of backroom work there that happened. But it's I'm glad we were able to get that, and so congratulations to everybody. It was a lot of work, and the very last. It always does come down to the very last day.
Thank you, and thank you for your work as committee chair too.
Chair Crystal?
Yes, please.
So I might as well chime in while we're all giving each other, stuff on back. Definitely, Amy is amazing and always has been, and I agree with Chair Sullivan that we did give her heart failure at the very end. But I would be remiss if I also didn't say thank you to Paul Krizak, who is one of our appropriators. So having him where he was invaluable. So I think at the end of the day, we did a lot of really great work. I think we have a lot to be proud of. But specifically for what we're talking about here in NVTC, definitely Amy deserves a great amount of thanks, and we'll look forward to moving forward. And it is great that we have such a good, well-represented team all the way around, so that we can continue to advocate for all that's important to us here in the region, and certainly specifically at NVTC. So we're proud of what we were able to get done, but congratulations and thanks to Amy too.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, excellent. I think that note of gratitude throughout is well placed and well deserved. We appreciate you all and the time spent advocating for transit and for the interests of the local pairs too, during a session that was focused on many other things. So thank you, and thanks for, especially I think you could be forgiven for just wanting to take a nap at this point. So that we have such great representation here on our Thursday meeting after you just wrapped on Monday is a credit as well. So thank you, and Amy, a big thanks to you too. Speaking of well-deserved naps, I hope you've got some on your agenda too.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everybody for all the kind words. I mean, honestly, I couldn't do it without everybody, especially, Kate, Zach, Tenley, and Alex, who works with me. I mean, huge help. It's a team effort, and having such great General Assembly members is really such a change, obviously, for NVTC, and we greatly appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference. So thank you to everybody. It's certainly a huge team effort. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. All right, on that note, Kate, equal amounts of positivity about the American Rescue Plan Act on the federal side, right?
Oh, if I only had the crystal ball. But no, I'm happy to give a federal update. And obviously, Paul Wiedefeld touched on a number. There's things that are happening literally real time, as the House of Representatives just about last week passed another rescue plan. And the thing that, of course, is really impressive for us is this is looking at over 30 billion for public transit across the US. So that is part of that Senate package that's being discussed right now. Senator Warner and Senator Kaine are just huge champions for making sure that transit stays in there. We do know it's going to be very challenging for it to continue as it deliberates through the US Senate. So obviously we're watching that very closely. Paul also mentioned the recent announcement, both on the House and Senate side, of that dedicated stated good repair funding for WMATA. That's the $150 million a year. And actually both the House and Senate have some additional funds and a couple of different nuances on both sides. But we're excited to see that both of those legislations have been announced and hopefully moving through as well. On the administrative side, USDOT's announced another round of a discretionary program called the Infra Multimodal Grant Application Process. So those are the kind of things, obviously, we're going to be watching for. The competitive grant programs that are coming out of the administration, whether it be the new version of Build or Tiger. We do have an administration that is very supportive of the type of things I think that are near and dear to all of our hearts. So seeing how those can prioritize projects that may be in our region is something that's really, really important. The other thing I wanted to mention is that FTA, actually something they do every year, but again, may be of interest of some of our transit agencies, what they refer to as the low-no program, which is basically a program for low and no emission buses and bus facilities. That's another discretionary grant program that was announced recently. And I know we've been talking to some of the jurisdictions around interest of that grant program. That's likely an annual program. It's been around for a while, but it's definitely something that I know that some of our transit agencies, as they look to electrify, might want to look at that program. And then finally, sort of the perhaps even bigger than the additional relief package is the talk of infrastructure. The joke being infrastructure week will never come. But there actually were very positive, sound like very positive talks today at the White House with key members of Congress and the administration to really talk about a major infrastructure package. That's something that Senator Kaine actually mentioned when he came met with me and a couple other Northern Virginia transportation folks just a couple weeks ago. The idea of moving something big and bold is what he was saying. And that would be everything from sort of, as we talk about transportation, but also water, sewer, broadband, and a number of different things. So I definitely think it's very important to be watching that space. And as I have relayed to most of our jurisdictions following the meeting with Senator Warner, the Congress actually really does want to hear about the big projects that our jurisdictions would like to pursue. There is some talk of the return of earmarks. And I think for all of us saying, if you could have earmarks that are things that you would really like to do versus something perhaps separate, that's always a great way to guide the conversation. And so I know that a number of the jurisdictions have already been doing sort of the letter writing campaign, but now is the time to talk about what those big infrastructure asks would be. And again, not just transportation, sewer, water, and broadband were other ones that I heard as well. So I'm happy to pause. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm happy to report on what I'm hearing and seeing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kate. Actually, that's really helpful and intel for us in the localities too. Questions for Kate on the federal space? All right. Well, I know we have not only our hopes for transit, but many of our local budget hopes pinned to that act too. So we'll be following its progress breathlessly. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and move on into the commuter choice presentation. This is both on the I-66 quarter round 4 update, and we're going to begin with the presentation by VDOT. So as I previewed at the top of the meeting, we have David Caudell, who's with us. He's the Division Administrator of VDOT's Tolling Operations Division. Wanted to make sure we get that title right, but most importantly, he is the man who can give us the update on what's happening with 66, revenues generated as a result of or lost as a result of the significant changes in how we commute or don't, and anticipated revenue and expenses over the fiscal 21 to 22 period. So Mr. Caudell, thank you for joining us tonight and for hanging with us to this point in the evening. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Thank you. That picture that was just on the screen, just to be clear, that individual is John Mason. He's actually on the call too. He's the facility director. He's the boots on the ground, and he's my team member here. If we get into some low-level questions, John's the guy I'm going to turn to. But with that, next slide. And so the one thing that following Mr. Wiedemann's presentation, it's like, wow, he's going through the same thing that I'm going through. It's a revenue impact on our facility. What I'm going to do is just go through the FY22 anticipated budget, just show you straight out, then give you the basis for why that budget looks like it looks, and then go through how we derived some of the revenue extrapolations. And then I'll briefly go through the project expenses so you can see that side too. Next slide. So it could be my internet connection, but are you guys on slide 3? The revenue
I think that's
slide?
what it looks like we're seeing. Maybe it says 33.
Yes. Oh, okay. That's all right. That's on your program. So yes, it's on my screen now. So what we're showing here is a typical budget, and that's what's on the right-hand column, the FY19. If we didn't have a COVID impact and some of the other impacts I'm going to go through, that's the kind of number that we'd be looking at annually as far as total revenue at 27 or 23.7 million. What we're seeing, however, as a result of these impacts is the $6 million under FY21, and that's a projection to the end of the year. It doesn't look much better on FY22. I know that's probably a very conservative number, but what I've been hearing and what we see on our side is it's better to be a little conservative than throw out a big number, and it's just so unpredictable. I remember back when this thing started a year ago, all of us having our internal discussions thought we'd be, back standing upright again in October, and it actually started to go down even worse in October. So one thing I want to point out under FY21, under those the unexpended balance for FY19, FY20, the reason those numbers are there, those are numbers that carried over from the previous fiscal years that we anticipated payments to the contractor, our toll system integrator. So they just followed along. We had some contract interpretation challenges, and we knew that eventually they would get resolved. And you'll see later on when we go through the expenses that, in fact, it got resolved this year. Next slide, please. So what's creating the impacts on our trip volumes and our revenue? Obviously, it's COVID. We're at 60% of what we were in a non-COVID or a pre-COVID environment, and we're only at 22% on our revenue side. So clearly, there's not a linear relationship between the numbers of trips or the decline in trips and the decline in revenue. In fact, just as an example, if let's just pull a number, we call it a density number of 15. If we double that density number, a full round or a full trip toll goes from $5 to $18. So it's more than 3 times. So doubling the density creates a 3 times event on the toll side. So it's not a linear relationship, and that's why we're not at the 60-60, we're at 60-22 on that breakdown. The other thing that's created some challenges or some density, or in one way it's good, for revenue it's not as good, is the eastbound widening project that has overlapped segments 2 and 3, and they'll show up on the slides, the following slides. And what also has been pointed out, the lower demand as telework has increased, as employers and employees become more comfortable with teleworking, that has definitely played a role in I think, the reductions in trips that we're seeing. The last thing, and I've got it in italics there, is the upcoming rehab of the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge. We're watching that. I know they're doing some planning on how they're going to maintain traffic there. We're following it very closely just to make sure that we're on top of any driving pattern changes or any kind of impacts resulting from lane reductions. Next slide. So if we look at traffic in the interstates in Northern Virginia, you can see, of course, the big reduction in March and April of last year, and then it starts to come back. And it looks like, as these graphs show on the daily volumes, that 495, 395, and 95 just are almost back to normal levels. They're probably at the 90% level. But if you look at 66 at the bottom, we're not. And it's interesting, I think, and I don't really have a story or a reason for it, but we're still hovering at around that 50 to 60% return on volume. And if you go to the next slide. This is an overview of the inside the Beltway express lanes, basically divided into 4 segments. Eastbound tolling, the eastbound hot operations in the morning, 5:30 to 9:30, so 4 hours there in the morning, and then 3 to 7 in the afternoon in the westbound direction. Next slide shows the actual widening impact. And that's in the eastbound direction, and there's a lane added. So in segment 2, it went from a 3-lane cross-section to 4-lane cross-section, and in segment 3, it went from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. That added capacity results in lower congestion and also a lower toll rate. And what we did is some of our modeling, we went back and looked at if that widening was in place back pre-COVID, then the revenue impacts on that would probably be a 13% decline. So having that additional capacity does affect, the revenue stream, even without any COVID impacts. Here's another slide that shows, again, the significant drop in trip volume and the associated revenue. As I noted earlier, we saw a little hope, a little glimmer of hope in the July and August, September timeframe as things started to try to claw their way back a little bit. And then, October, November, December, January, it all fell off again. And so that leads us to, we're trying to find a toehold in there to give us a good forecast, and it just hasn't shown up yet. Next slide. And so what we've done here, and this was the basis for the FY21 to finish out this year at 6.06 million. We've taken the cumulative effect of the weekly revenue and then extrapolated both in a linear and polynomial fashion, and ended up with a forecast that's between 6 and 7 million. And this is the expected revenue, so it actually would be more closer to the $6 million number. When we went to look at FY22, kind of back what I was saying earlier, there's just nothing to hang your hat on. We know there's going to be, at least we think there's going to be a bump as a result of the vaccines. Hard to tell how much and when, but we know there's going to be a negative impact as a result of the desire to continue to telework. I know it's maybe a little conservative, only 33% of the, or 33% increase over the FY21 number. I would expect, though, as we start to gain more experience, there would likely be an adjustment, or at least it would be appropriate to look at. So that's kind of the revenue shot. I'm going to go through the expenses and then be ready for questions. What you'll see again, I've got FY19 on the right side as a normal year. If we look at staffing and facility numbers, they're basically the same. The big change we have there, it's not even a big change, but if we look at the facilities and other direct costs, the other direct costs are associated with violation supports and our attorney fees that have to handle those. As I mentioned earlier, on that set aside for that revenue number on FY21, if we look at the TransCore line, that's a $5 million expense. That is it's a high number, as that's a catch up from the work that was done in FY18 and 19. A typical year is going to come in at $2 million, And then just below that, those transaction fees, we actually pay that toll system integrator to generate the trips for us, and these are the variable costs associated with the trips that show up or that we expect to show up. The routine IT maintenance, basically, that's for the signs and generators and sensors and other network devices that are throughout the system. And then we've got the fees that we pay EasyPass, and those are based on a per trip, as well as some image review as it relates to violations and some non-transponder-based transactions. Next slide. And this is the last slide as far as expenses. We'll see basically our consultant team. There's before I get there, Virginia State Police. That we pay them for HOV support, HOV enforcement, and then we have our consultant teams that provide support for us throughout the year. You'll see HNTV. There's a jump in the upcoming year. That's tied primarily to us having to go to a multi-protocol environment with our transponder system. Right now, we just read one style of transponder. To be more interoperable, we're going to increase that to potentially 3 different protocols. There's also some file spec changes that we have to deal with. The GEC number is tied to the I-66 outside the Beltway. WERIS provides us our DPA modeling and support as we observe that throughout the year. Dynamic pricing algorithm. And the major infrastructure and system replacement, that's a set aside that we have in anticipation for the system refresh, both on the hardware and software side. Typically, that's $1.5 million a year. However, in FY19, it was 2.5, but going forward, it's 1.5. This year, we won't be able to make that full allotment, and that's why there's no net revenue projection for NVTC. Next year, since the revenue is stated it's so low, we still have to make up the shortfall from the previous year on our infrastructure fund, and the resulting net revenue projection is a pretty pitiful $282,000. So that's the last slide. If you go to the next slide, I'm ready to try to address some questions.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Commissioners, questions? Feel free to jump in. I'll look for hands as well. Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thanks. Well, let me get it started off. So what if your revenue exceeds these, as you said, very conservative projections? When and how will we know that? And so I hear the presentation tonight, but I assume we're not saying that if the revenue actually rises above the projections, that what happens in that case? Maybe that's the question I need to ask.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's a different scenario, and I'd have to go back and read the agreement, but I'm certain the intent would be to adjust the revenue as it comes in on the actual side. We've done that before where we've carried over numbers and made sure that any excess revenue or any net revenue eventually gets to NVTC. I know we do quarterly updates with Kate's staff, and you'll know at the end of each quarter how we're running on our projection when we look at the actual numbers that come in. So I think it comes over. So if I'm off by $5 million, then some of those expenses would change, but certainly the net revenue line would increase.
Okay, because there are a lot of projects that we'd like to do, so I guess we have to start with conservative numbers, but you're not locking those numbers up in stone. You're not carving them in stone, if you will. In other words, as the revenue projections, which you will report to us quarterly, go up, it's potentially the case that we could begin to do projects that we can't do if at the current projection level.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Snyder.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman, are you on mute?
Indeed, I am trying to follow my own advice to cut down on background noise. Thank you so much. I was actually just saying, Mr. Snyder, well put in that question. I think it's the one on everyone's minds. So, any other questions for Mr. Cardell? Okay. Well, we appreciate you. I mean, I think obviously we're very concerned about the future of our program. We're also just interested about the impact to toll payers. So having this data and knowing that you all are continuing to model this and forecast it is very helpful to us, and we appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Madam Chairman.
Thanks so much. All right, and so I think Mr. Owen and our team is just about to say, great, has a couple of updates on the commuter choice program on the 395/95 side, where the arrangement differs a little bit. It's a concession payment from the toll facility operator, so maybe a less dire picture. Mr. Owen, that you have the pleasure of presenting us to us tonight. I will turn things over to you.
Yes, thank you. I will make it pretty short and mostly sweet. So yes, in the last month, we've been pretty busy with doing our eligibility reviews on the applications we received for round 2 funding. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a recap, our round 2 call for projects, which is covering fiscal years 2022 and 23 funding, that closed on Friday, January 29th. We received a total of 18 applications from 8 applicants with a total $26.2 million funding request. So throughout February, we reviewed all 18 for alignment with requirements of the MOA with the Commonwealth that governs the program, most crucially around the project's ability to benefit toll payers. We also looked at the proposals in light of adopted program policy. And we engaged with DRPT staff in this process. They help us verify that the proposed projects meet the requirements of the 395 MOA. So what you see here is a schematic of the 13 eligible proposals out of the 18 with a $21.9 million total funding request. Most of these are for bus services. Almost all of those bus services are from Stafford County on north. The proposals include continued funding of several OmniRide and Fairfax Connector service improvements that we funded under round 1. Excuse me. Also, a few significant Dash and Fairfax Connector local service improvements in the northern portion of the corridor, and one proposed new VRE feeder bus service in the Fredericksburg area, and that project also includes minor improvements to an existing park and ride lot. There is one eligible transportation demand management proposal consisting of a couple different monthly incentives for new van pools operating in the corridor to help as a means to help rebuild the van pool market post-COVID. And finally, 2 park and ride capital projects, one in Prince William County, expansion of a lot there at Horner Road that prior to COVID was typically parked full every day, as well as completion of funding for a new lot in Spotsylvania County that initially would serve carpools and van pools heading up north. So overall, pretty good coverage of the overall corridor, which is quite long in this case, over 40 miles all the way from Spotsylvania County up to the Virginia-Washington, D.C. line. There were 4 ineligible applications. I mentioned earlier program policy, so 3 of these 4 were proposed transportation demand management projects that did not align with the definition of allowable standalone TDM projects that the commissions adopted in November. This definition really emphasizes strategies that are targeted to corridor commuters and have directly measurable usage or ridership outcomes. So those are requirements for anything that we would support. The idea is so that we could easily evaluate and report on the effectiveness of these projects, which has been a challenge with this type of project so far, given that these tend to be kind of longer term efforts to encourage commuters to change travel modes from driving alone to other means. We will be continuing to work with applicants interested in seeking funding for TDM to identify efforts under future calls for projects that would fit with the definition. The 4th ineligible proposal was for a piece of a project that has not yet received other funding for implementation. So the piece by itself that they were asking us to fund would not deliver benefits to toll payers. And that leaves one more. So you might be wondering how we got from 18 to 13. There were 2 very similar applications from the same applicant that were consolidated into a single project. So that's how we ended up where we are. The funding picture, as the chair alluded to, is relatively good for this corridor, given the length of the corridor, as well as the full-time tolling in the 95 and 395 express lanes. We do anticipate full funding of roughly $30 million for this 2-year program. This is a bit of a unique situation in that we are undersubscribed this time around. And our best take on the situation is, this program is really focused on commuter-oriented projects that can be implemented quickly. And it's still kind of a soft market for peak period commute trips, especially the long haul types of trips that have kind of been the bread and butter of the program to date, as well as, just uncertainty about going forward, how much teleworking may continue to influence things when people do go back to their offices. I do want to commend our applicants for thinking carefully and pragmatically about projects that make sense to advance at this time, and I think we will have some strong candidates despite the challenging circumstances that we're all in right now. Next slide, please. So just a bit more breakdown here of the 13 eligible applications. Overall, about 80% of the funding request is for new and enhanced bus services. These are general project categories, so these categories typically do include bus purchases and other capital improvements. One thing we will be looking at is that our MOA for the program stipulates that no more than half of our available program funds over a 5-year average may be allocated to transit operations. But we do define that kind of as narrowly as we can to costs directly related to operations so that we can maximize the support we can provide for transit service projects. In terms of the NVTC PRTC breakdown, a bit more of a total funding request among NVTC jurisdictions and transit providers, a few more eligible proposals among PRTC jurisdictions and transit providers. Next slide, please. So with the eligibility review complete, we are sliding right on into scoring the eligible applications per the evaluation process that the commission's adopted in November. We are aiming to share draft scores with the applicants late next week, just to ensure that we captured the characteristics and anticipated benefits of their projects accurately. In April, we will be opening our fully online 1-month public comment period, and the Joint Commission Working Group, consisting of 3 NVTC commissioners and 3 PRTC commissioners, will be meeting on the 22nd of April at 1 p.m. to review technical evaluation results and to identify an approach to developing a program of projects for funding subject to the public comment we receive. May is more or less briefing month on the projects under consideration for funding to both commissions and CTB. We will be concluding public comment and then seeking adoption of a program of projects in June by the commissions and then the CTB, after which we will distribute project agreements for the selected projects so that they may begin implementation with the start of the new fiscal year. So thus ends my brief presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to all of our applicants as well, that we were able to have, if not an oversubscribed program, then at least a good one to advance transit alternatives in this corridor. Questions for Mr. Owen? Okay, well, given the hour, I'm going to go ahead and just move us right on to VRE. Mr. Owen, thanks again for the presentation. Mr. Dalton, I know we don't have any VRE action items, but we do have a report from you. So welcome, glad to have you, and I will turn things to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glad to be here. And good evening, Commission members and others. In your packet, of course, you have the CEO report, the February 24th memo, and some other information. So let me just give you a brief update and just speak to some of the highlights. VRE continues to operate at a reduced service level, which is referred to our S Schedule Plus. Wanted to note over the past month, I, along with other transit leaders in the region, have been involved in discussions related to our current responses to COVID-19 and other topics with members of the new administration, including Secretary Buttigieg, Acting FTA Administrator Nuria Fernandez, and Acting FRA Administrator Amit Bose. In addition to VRE's efforts, I believe the region's transit providers are doing well to ensure a safe return of our riders. Ridership For the month of February, we continue to see daily ridership at about 1,000 average daily riders a day. With only just a few months into March, we're starting to see that daily ridership levels at the pre-holiday, which was back in November of 2020, which is approximately 1,500 average daily riders. And we just hope that that trend continues, and of course, that trend continues to increase. On-time performance for the month of February was 93% system-wide. We did, February continued to have some weather-related delays in addition to some system congestion due to freight and Amtrak trains. The majority of VRE staff members, we continue to work, for the most part remotely. All of our business functions are fully operational as we continue to maintain a continuity of operations. That's the end of my report, Madam Chair.
Ms. Chair, I think you're muted still.
Unbelievable. All right, no excuse for it. Thank you so much. I was just going to say I'm doing a quick scan for questions. I am seeing none, so Mr. Dalton, we will say thank you for the report and for, as always, keeping us apprised. Director Mitchell, let me welcome you. I see you on the screen joining us now from DRPT for a report on behalf of, well, your own department agency. Welcome this evening.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, I'm going to keep this very short because we do have a written report in your package as well. Just a reminder that our grant cycle did close at the end of February. We are now in the process of evaluating our grant applications. I'm sorry, it closed at the beginning of February. We received over 220 million in funding requests for whereas we have only about $69 million in capital funding available. So we are in the process of evaluating those using our merit screening process and expect to bring recommendations to the CTB in April. We are starting our Springfield to Quantico transit study, and this is something that came out of the General Assembly last year. We will be having a briefing for elected officials that are bordering the corridor on next week on the 11th at 1:30. So that information should be up on our website as well. I'm not going to give an update on all the legislation because Amy did such a great job before discussing the budget amendments. We're very excited about working on the transit modernization study that Delegate McQuinn sponsored. And that is a study that's going to look at transit needs across the state, things like electrification, environmental improvements, and other technology improvements that can be implemented. So we're very excited about getting that started. And again, obviously, we had the budget amendments for the WMATA dedicated funding, for VRE expansion on the Manassas line, and then also for an extension of rail from Roanoke to the New River Valley, which actually does provide a second Amtrak frequency that would serve Northern Virginia as well. So one other thing was there was a budget amendment for what we're calling the Transit Equity Program for $10 million. And that is something that we can use to support no fare and low fare programs. And so we're working on guidance for that right now, which we'll be releasing and bringing to our CTB in the not too distant future. And what only other notice is that we just issued last week a notice to proceed for preliminary engineering on the Long Bridge. So that's moving forward now too. So that's all I've got. Happy to take questions.
That's really exciting, that final comment. Glad to hear it. All right. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. And I think I am off mute this time. Kate, I'm going to turn over to you, Ms. Mattice, for our Executive Director report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as always, I encourage you to read my newsletter and the financial reports that are included. And just as a reminder, we do not have a meeting next month. Our April meeting is canceled so that all of our jurisdictions can have a lot of fun at their budget hearings and other work sessions. So I do not envy you at all. So our next meeting of the commission will be on May 6th. Alas, as Ben had mentioned, we do plan on convening our program advisory committee as well as the joint commission working group to dive into 395 projects on April 22nd. As well as a couple of other updates that we'll be presenting to that committee. The other thing I did want to share that our transit marketing campaign is continuing to do really well with local radio, streaming services, and online. Thanks again to a grant from DRPT and the funding share from our local partners to make that happen. The message of that is that public transit's here to take you where you need to go. And hopefully folks have been able to hear it or see it on WTOP and WAMU. We're in week 6. And so far, the link which goes to, we direct people to novarides.org, which is a website where people, regardless of where they are in Northern Virginia, can basically find whatever transit service. It's not just one single transit service, but all the transit services, how they can get there where they need to go. And so we've had over 6,000 6,000 page views just since we started this on January 25th, which is looking really, really good. And the next phase that's going to be coming out is a video campaign. And so we're excited to be able to launch that shortly. And those will be seen on YouTube, which is really a huge driver of people for our site last time we did this. So again, it's really great. This is hopefully, you know, it pairs up with what Mamata and others are doing to get people back on transit. And so that's all I have for my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I know that was a topic of conversation last month as well with that return to transit campaign. So we appreciate the update. Questions for Kate? Okay. Any other general comments for the good of the order before we adjourn this evening? I think I see none. Thank you all again for the great conversation, especially with General Manager Wiedefield tonight. Appreciate all of your work. We will not see you in April, as Kate noted. Best of luck to those of us who will be in budget sessions. And I look forward to seeing you all again once spring has well and truly sprung and we're being visited by the biblical plague of cicadas in May. Until then, please take care and we'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Good night.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, everybody stay well.